Hey creators, today we're going to talk about persistence, aka the way to save data on a player. So let's start off by actually testing out what we're going to be doing today. So we have a get your stats, we have a decrement stat, we have a increment stat, and we have a set stat. So let's just start off by interacting with this a few times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-ish. Then we're going to get the stats. Let's see in the log here. Okay, I incremented by 4. I couldn't count. But yeah, it's 4 now, right? Let's decrement the stat a little bit, just because we can. And it's been decremented a few times. Let's check our stats now. And our stats is 1. Now comes the fun one, right? Let's set our stat. Now this is just a random number I just put in, right? But yeah, we can see that works, right? So yeah, let's actually go in and see how this works. Now, if you do want to read the documentation yourself, there's 2 really good articles. I will put it down in the description. One that explains how you actually use persistent data, and one which is more of like a tutorial. This one actually like gives real examples. Mine is just gonna be called example, right? And I'm gonna talk about what you could replace it with, etc. But this is really good reads. Really good reads. I would definitely recommend. Let's actually look at it now. So, really simple. All I really have here is 4 buttons. That's all that's required. You could replace it, of course, if let's say every time you hit a trigger, you wanna increment money stat on a player. You could do that. It's up to you. There's really like endless possibilities. This is why persistence is such a good thing. Right. Let's actually open up and see what we've done. So, inside the game manager, you've probably seen this one before. Everybody uses game manager, or at least calls it game manager, since, funny enough, it's a game manager. But in here, all we really do is we set the edibles of buttons. So we have the 4 buttons here. And then on the onBegin, all I really do is, well, I guess the first part of the actual persistence is this part here. So this is where whenever the script begins, whenever the game begins, it will get all the players and it will initialize them. That's all this does. Gets all players and initializes each one of them. And you need to initialize people because it's basically your way of putting default values or existing values onto the player. It's basically just to make sure that it actually exists on the player that is currently playing at the moment. And then we have the 4 buttons again. This is, again, usual stuff like interacted with when you subscribe to the function, and the functions are down here. So this is what we did before, right? So all I really do here is I go in and save the data as int. You could do it differently. Just in my case, I prefer to use ints as they don't use a lot of space, and there is a limit to the stats. I haven't personally gone over it yet, but I prefer not to. So I use ints, and then I use we'll talk about that later. It's fine. But basically, what I do here is I take the agent, and then what stat do I want to what's it called? Change. In my example, it's example. What sort of manipulation type do I want? Do I want to increment it? Do I want to decrement it? Do I want to set it? And then how much? Right, so I could put this to 5, and then it would increment by 5 every single time. All I have to do is change 5 right here. Nothing, nowhere else. Right there. That's it. Same goes for decrement, right? 5, and then if I didn't want to set it to like this, I can put like 9, and then it's gonna be 9. We're just gonna put it for that right now. And then I have a show stats. So this is personal preference. In my case, I didn't want to set up like a lot of billboards, a lot of etc. Right? I'm just gonna log it, and it works perfectly fine. If you all you really want to do is use this part right here. This is how you get the data as an int. That's an important thing as an int. So you're basically only getting an int now. So say you have a string that you've saved on the player. You have to do it a bit differently. But in my case, I only want to show ints because I don't want to, like, it can take hours before I can explain like how to save arrays, how to save strings, how to save logic. We're just gonna do ints in this case, right? So fully simple game manager. But now we get into the fun part. As you can see, I also have the debug util I used last time. I would advise getting it because it's quite good for persistence, so you can easily see what's wrong and so on. So let's actually go into to the import I've made. So I made a player repository. Let's go into that one. This is the script right here. Everything is going to be on GitHub, by the way. But yeah, player repository. This is it. In here, I've connected a player service. We're going to cover that in a sec. But in here, all I really do is I call the player service a bunch of times. So in here, for the initialize player, I call player service, initialize player. So I'm trying to focus on improving like the way people do Verse and do a lot of like clean code. So this is why, like, you know, in theory, I could have just what's it called? Where is it? Initialize player. I could have been like, what's it called? Made a service in here and then put this in here. But that's not clean code. We want single responsibility, right? So, boom. It basically initializes player. We'll cover it in a second when we go into the player service. Now down here is the fun part. So this is where a lot of people overcomplicate things. All you really need in this section right here is what stat do you want? Like, oh, okay, well, we'll cover maps, right? So the way I map out things, right, is based on the what's it called? The imported variable, right? So based on stat, I want to check, is that stat example? It could be money. We could type money. It's not gonna work because it's not set up like this. But if it was money, then it will check the stat type. Now it is a bit confusing the way it's what's it called written out and so on, right? But it's just a better way of helping you having to code a lot more less. So yeah, here in this example, we're just using the same example as I said. Now down here in the manipulation action, this is again a manipulation type. We're gonna go into the library and you're gonna see exactly what I'm doing in there. Now in here, we do manipulation type increment. Now if it is increment, then it will write out this for you. So you don't have to keep writing player service dot increment player service dot it does it for you. It's fully like, instead of having like 3 methods where one is increment, one is decrement, one is set stat, all you have to do is use this little function right here. Yeah, perfect. So stat actions, manipulation actions. Now down here, we're actually figuring out, okay, which stat is it within the stat actions? So in our case, it's going to be example because that's the only example. If it is, it will write out, or it will use the example action, right? Now, for the manipulation action, we're putting in the manipulation type that we're using, and then we'll go in, oh, you're using manipulation type decrement? Okay, I will set this to the decrement stat one. So I've set these two, and then I'm using them down here, right? So in here, it goes in, and it says, okay, let's take, as an example, we're gonna increment our stat. It puts this right here, and then we're gonna cover it in a second, right, in the player service. And then what does the player service require? It requires an agent, what type of stat it is, and the amount. And the amount we have also put in, right? So this is what we've done in here. We put in the agent, we put in the stat, we put in the manipulation type, and how much. And then it does it for you. And then it will also, because it's nice to see some feedback that it works, etc. It also goes in and logs the amount you've put into which stat and what type of manipulation you've done. Boom, easy. Now if we go down again, this is the get data as int, right? So here we just return the int of the stat. So in our case, it's example. Again, we could use money as an example, or kills. Kills is another good one. These are like the usual ones people use in their maps, right? But it could have just been, yeah, kills as an example we've used here. All you really need to do, right, if you don't understand coding, is you can do Control F, search for example, And all you really need to do is just change wherever it says example. And if you want to add more stats to it, right? Let's add, let's say money. Money. There we go. Money, right? And then all you have to do is just copy down here, do an else, because it's not another if statement, an else statement down here. And then money. Perfect. Now it is going to complain because it is not a real stat yet, because we're going to go further down the rabbit hole here in a second. But actually, let's just implement it just for fun and giggles, right? Now let's go into the player library, because this is where we've actually used a bunch of these already within the player repository. The player library is another way of this is to make this a lot more cleaner and easier to use, so we don't have to use a lot of different functions. It will take forever, etc. Boom. It's gonna be super, super easy. All you have to do, right, in the stat, whenever you create a new stat, that's it, in the stat one, and then you'll see down here, it's gonna complain. This is where we convert the stat type to a string. So, do stat.money is money. Boom. No longer complain. The same works for the manipulation type. So let's say it's never gonna be like this, because I'm pretty sure you can't delete data. But let's say you wanna delete something from the player. You make a manipulation type called delete. You do it down here as well. And then in here, you set it up. Player service.delete if it was using it like that, right? Alright, boom. So we've set up money a little bit now, but it's still not working. And the reason why it's not working is we gotta go further down, right? Player service. Actually, we'll not cover player service just yet, because I'm pretty sure it's probably better that we do stat types first. Stat types, again, if you've read the documentation, this is necessity. So if we want to add money in here, all you really want to do, right, is boom, money, and you've got the money stat. Now you are gonna see that I'm going a little bit around here, but all you want to do, right, is create basically the exact same as this, just where you replace example with money. Super, super, super simple. It's not rocket science. This all you it's changing a few things, variables here and there, and then boom. All right, you're still gonna see it's complaining still. Why is it complaining? Well, now we're actually setting up what is saved on the player. This is the player stats file. The player stats file is actually what is saved on the player. So as an example, we're gonna use again money int equals 0. Same concept. We're changing the example to money. Boom. Now we've got money implemented soon. Boom, boom, boom. So here we have the player service file. Now this one actually goes in and changes stuff on the player. So it changes as an example, variable that we put on the player. Now we're gonna do it for the money as well, because why the hell not, right? Like, we're showing the example. And also, it initializes the player. So if you haven't got the data already, this is the little, I guess you could say, the repository is the middleman, but this guy is this script is actually what's doing it now. So if the player does not have a player stats map, so if the player does not have stats yet, it's gonna make it. If the player does have stats, you can fetch it. If you want to reset the player, you're gonna reset it. These are kind of like default. You need these. If you don't have these, it's probably not gonna go very well for you. Especially the initialize, because the initialize, if you don't initialize the player, it's never gonna work. Like, you can't save data on a player that doesn't have a player stats map. Now the player stats map, if you were paying attention a little bit in the player library, this is just a reference, right? So it references a player to a player stats table. And the player stats table is the one we made in here, which is the table of all the things we're actually saving, right? So example and money. And then when you make the player stats table, this is the part where you actually if you have an existing one, You make a new one, kind of, if you can say it like that. So you take the old table and you replace it with the new one, basically. All right, let's go back. Reset. Basically, it just sets your table to nothing, and then it initializes you again. That's all it does. Now in here, this is where we get. So we get the player stats table, and if the player, or we get the player, right? Because it's a player we're using. We're not using an agent. Agent is still working. So don't go around and be like, oh, I need to use a player, I need to use a player. You can use an agent. Don't worry about it. Player, agent, I don't want to go into all the details, but player is basically, I don't think I want to call it a parent, but it's kind of like the parent of agent. So the agent is a child, but that's a lot of like verse technicality. But we don't care about that. We just want to make stats right now. So don't worry about it. But in here, you still need it. Again, the code is going to be on GitHub. You really like this. I'm just explaining how it works, so you don't have to get too much messy, but so you still know if something breaks, this is how to fix it. So we get the player, and then we get the player stats table. So we get the players, the current players that we are, so the agent that we're getting stats from. We're getting their table of stats. And then we're basically giving it back, right? So this is the player stats table. So we're basically giving, it's kind of like a transaction, right? So you say, hey, I would like this player's stats. And it's going to be like, okay, here you go, man. Here's the table. Now, again, this is not going to work if you haven't initialized the player. So keep that in mind. Now comes the fun part, though. This is the part where we actually like increment, decrement, and set stats. Again, increment, decrement, and set is like basically all you would ever need. Again, this is with ints. You could, well, you can't really increment a string, but you can set a string. You can do a lot of things, right? But in our case, we're using int here. All right, let's cover the increment, decrement, and set stat. So in the increment one, again, all we're doing is based on the agent that we're incrementing the set for. We're getting the player, we're getting the stats table. And then we're checking, okay, if the stat that we're changing is example, then we're gonna get the, what's it called, the stat on the player's table. Say we have a player's table, right? On the table it says example, it says money, it says kills as example. We're getting the example data. This is the value of example. Say example is 5, this is 5. Then we want to recreate that one, right? So we want to set the current the what's it called, the player's stats map that the player has to a new player's table. We make a player's stats table. So this is the thing we're doing in here in the player stats here. So we're doing this. We're taking the old value and replacing it with a new value. Now, if you're let's say you're creating it for example stat, right? It's not gonna change the money stat to anything differently. It's just a way of doing it, right? So what it does here is it creates a new the new stats table with old stats, but the only difference is we're setting the example to being something new. Now in our case, we're taking the example, or let's say it has a value of 5, and we're plussing it with a new score, the int that we're putting in, the amount that we set in the very beginning of the script, right, in the game manager. This is what we're doing in here, and then after that it will say in the debug, you've incremented, or your example has been incremented by this amount. Now, if you're using an invalid stat, it will say invalid stat. If you haven't got a player's stats table, it will say it has not been found. Same concept down here. We're not gonna cover it like fully. All it really does down here, right, is it minuses the score this time. And if we're going straight down again, we're not using the player example anymore, because when we don't want to use the existing one, we want to set a new one. That's what we do down here. So that's fully covered, right? This is all it ever does. So let's make a new one, right? Just to show you, since we're using money anyway. All right. So I just fully copied this and put an else in front of it, by the way. Now, let's say we're using money. Again, you can just, every time it says example, replace it with money. Money, 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 boom. Now we've got money in here. Same concept down here. If you want to log it correctly and ensure that, nothing goes wrong as an example, replace example with money. Again, boom. Now we can increment the money stat. Now, a little side note here. If you don't put this in, you cannot increment it. So as an example, if we're trying to decrement now, it will say, no, you cannot do it. It doesn't work. It won't work. What you could do, if you, let's say, there's a specific stat that you never want to decrement, as an example. I don't know what type of stat that would be, right? But let's say, I screwed up. Again, else, boom, boom, boom. Alright, let's say we don't want to ever decrement our money. Because I don't know why you would ever do that, but let's say we never want to. You can add inside of the what's it called? Error handling, I'm gonna call it, right? You can put in here. Money cannot be decremented, as an example. This is error handling. So if by chance you're trying to decrement a stat that you don't want to decrement, so it's not gonna do anything up here because you haven't put it up here. All it's gonna say is you cannot do this action if you do this, right? But in our case, sadly, money does decrement. That's how life is. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna add it, of course. And again, where it says example, you put in your new stat. Boom, example, boom, 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 boom. Now it's gone. There's no more examples here. It's all money. Same goes for down here, but we're not gonna do it down here because it doesn't really make sense to set money anytime, right? Unless you want to be a billionaire, but I don't know. So we're just gonna, in our case, we're just gonna decrement and increment the money stat. So now, let's go back to the game manager. Because we've just added money now. Money is fully implemented. All we ever really need to do now is change it in here. So let's say, okay, we're removing example because we don't want to use example anymore because we've actually got a good example now. Let's use money. Now, as I said, money cannot be used here. Let's actually go in and I know this is kind of jumping around, but it is what it is, right? Let's go in here and debug. So in case money ever gets put in, we're gonna say money, let's just say action cannot be performed. Money cannot be set. So just an example, it doesn't really need to be anything. All right. So let's say we want to set it to, something, maybe not a 0 in front of it. So every single time we press on the button, let's increment it by, let's do 15, just because, let's do 17, the lucky number. Let's do decrement by 5. Now again, you could make another function. Let's say we have, instead of a button, we have a trigger. You make a new trigger, and you can put a different value inside. You can put, say, 20. Then every time you are pressing this specific button, you're decrementing by 20. If you're pressing this button that we have right now, you're decrementing by 5. Boom. And then last but not least, we're showing the stats. Fully simple. Now, if we end game, let's end game if it wants to. Put the verse. Now, again, example is fully out of the picture now. We're just gonna use money now. And if we start the game. Alright. Now I do want to show you. I don't log that in, I guess. It is what it is. If you get the stats now. 0. Because inside of the stats that we put on the player, we have initially set it to 0. Because you don't want to start with any money, you gotta work for the money. So let's start working for the money, right? Oh, we're just keep on pressing the buttons. Boom, 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 boom. We're getting rich, right? Let's go into the log. I have 85 money now. Let's say, okay, I want to buy an ice cream now. It has decremented by 5. Let's get our money. I have 80 now. Ah, I shouldn't have bought the ice cream, because I wanted enough money to buy something else, right? Now let's try and set the stat, because this is not gonna work, as I said. Action cannot be performed. Money cannot be set. Now, don't mind this, because this doesn't work. If we get the money stat now, it will still say 80. I think 93 for of money stat. I think it's because we tried to do something in here where there's some more error handling we could have done, right? But it will not work. Inside of the actual place we are setting the stat, it does not work. It will never be set, even though somewhere else in the code it says, hey, you've actually tried to do this. So this is how it actually works. Let's recap really quickly. Really quickly. Game Manager. In here, this is everything you'd ever need to touch regarding player manipulation, right? You have the player repository, and inside of it, you want to save the data. You save the data of agent to the stat of money. You want to increment it for 17. And so on, right? I don't want to cover it again. Then we go into the player repository. And inside here, this is where we do a lot of the middleman logic. So we don't have to type a lot of things out. This is what we do in here. So if the manipulation time is increment, it will go in and say, okay, player service dot increment stat, instead of having 5 of these or something. Same goes for down here. Here you get the what's it called? The data. If it, as an example, if you don't get the what's it called? The stat, it will return minus. This is just something I do. So I know every time it's in minus, something went wrong. You could change it to, I don't know, just 0 or something. It doesn't really make sense. But yeah. And then this one is connected to the player service. And inside of the player service, this is where we do actually all the logic. And again, I have set up everything for you on the GitHub link. Everything you have to do is just Control F and search for example and change it to money. The only little coding you really need to do is how are you gonna get your money? How are you gonna get your kills? Let's say kills, right? Kills, you can use a elimination manager device. When eliminated, you can put in devs. When you get an elimination, you can put in kills. Boom! It's not that rocket science anymore, right? When it's set up like this. And the documentation is a little bit like a long read, and it's a little bit tiring, and some of it kind of doesn't really work, etc. But I'd give it a read, just so you know how it works, right? Because say you're making a game, and you've gotten so far into the development, and it doesn't work. It fully breaks because of persistent. Just know how it works before using it. That's my biggest tip for you. And I think that was basically it. I've made a Discord. I'm gonna put it in the description. This is a general community Discord around me and my verse and etc. I'm trying to make a little bit of a community of people who want to learn verse and also just good verse practices. So I've made that. Hopefully you guys will join that. Also, again, everything you've seen in the video, the code is on my GitHub. I've put it in the description. All you really have to do is download everything it says in there, and then you're good. It also has a lot of other stuff. I've used, I have a public repository basically where there's some abilities, there's some other stuff. It is in the description. And then last but not least, if you did enjoy the video, be sure to like, subscribe, and yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video.